Hi class, it's Bill Berry back with the second video in our Programming with Choices series. We looked last time at some simple if statements and how they could help us handle a special case. We also talked in general about selection and what it was and gave you some analogies, but we're continuing now with some new tools to help our if statements get more interesting, right? Our selection cases to cover more scenarios. So let us jump in and do that. Let's jump to the slide and here we go. So we're going to learn now about the if-else structure, right? So that you can not only handle this one special case, but you can always also handle this otherwise case, right? In one case, do this thing, but in another case, in the otherwise case, do something else, right? The default case. So let's look at some analogies and make sure that we understand what it is, and then again, we'll get more and more technical. First, in this example, your daughter comes and says, I'm bored, right? I don't know what to do. This is summer. This is the second week already. Your kids are bored, right? So your daughter says, I'm bored, and you say, look, why don't you call Jessica, right? You like to play with Jessica, so why don't you call Jessica and see if she can play? Otherwise, go outside and play with your sister. In this case, we have two scenarios, right? There's two different cases that need to be covered. Either she's going to call Jessica, or if she doesn't want to do that, the default is, the other case is, she's going to go outside and play with her sister. So she has that option. Now, one of the things that we want to see here is this is a mutually exclusive choice that you have given her. You've said she needs to do one of those two things. She's either going to play with Jessica or go play with her sister. We're not offering a combo deal. We're not offering a neither deal. It's really one of these two options, and she can choose door A or door B, but she's going to make one of those two choices. So that's important to understand. It's mutually exclusive, right, is the way that we're setting up this particular problem, this analogy. Let's get a little more specific and a little more real world. Let's say that we have this scenario. The commission rate is 8% on homes that sell for $500,000 or more, but if the home is below that, right, if it's not yet $500,000, we need to have commission of 10%, right? So we have an 8% scenario and we have a 10% scenario. One important thing that I'll mention later, we need to understand exactly how many scenarios we are talking about in order to code this correctly. Is there one scenario, two, three, more, whatever? In this case, there are two very specific scenarios. It's an 8% scenario and a 10% scenario. There is no other scenario that is discussed here, right? So we need to be clear on the fact that there's just two choices, right? So in a flowchart, we might say something like this. Again, here's our diamond for our decision. If the home price is greater than or equal to 500,000, then we calculate commission by taking home price and multiplying it by 0.08. Otherwise, if the home price is not greater than or equal to $500,000, if the answer is no, then we calculate it by taking the home price and multiplying it by 0.1. Does that make sense? Right? That's our two scenarios expressed in a flowchart. We could express them in pseudocode, again using indentation. If the home price is greater than 500K, then you calculate the commission by doing this. Otherwise, you calculate the commission by doing this. And then you display that home price and the commission, right? Does that make sense? So these things are, it's a simple scenario where we have two cases, but we need to be able to code those things up. So how do we do that? Well, let's jump over to our code, right? I'll bring that window up, and let's see how we're going to express this thing in code, right? So let me do this. All right, so the first thing we need to do is that we need to ask the user for the home price. So you can guess what I'm going to do here. Number prompt. Enter home price, and then my default, there's no default. Make sure that I close my parentheses. Watch the highlighting so you know that that's correct. And then, in this case, I need to calculate commission one of two ways. Well, how am I going to do that? Well, the way this is going to work is you're going to use an if, and then you're going to use an else. And this is the way it's going to look. Again, when you start typing these things, always do this, right? Always start by typing if, parentheses, and the curly braces. But then I'm going to add another part to it here, and I'm going to type an else, and I'm going to type curly braces, right? So in here, I'm going to put any code that I need to run in the case that the home price is whatever this is, and this is going to be the other case, right? So in this case, if the home price is greater than or equal to 500,000, then I want to run certain code, but if it's not, then I put it down here, right? So this is the if code and this is the else code. So in this case, how do I do this? Well, I'm going to create the commission variable and I'm going to assign it to home price times 0.08, right? If the home price is greater than or equal to $500,000, I'm calculated commission by taking the home price and multiplying it by 0.08. Otherwise, I'm calculating commission by taking home price and multiplying it by 0.10, right? So I've coded up the if case and the else case. It's either this or it's that. It's one or the other. It's mutually exclusive, so they all live together in this one block that's the if and then the else, right? This is one big if concept, and there's two sub-pieces, the if piece and the else piece. Notice I don't have to say anything here about if home price is less than $500,000. It has to be. One of the things to keep in mind here is understand what you know at every moment along the way, right? At this point, before this statement runs, right after this one, you know you have the home price in your hand, but that's all you know. If you got into this code, you know that the home price was greater than or equal to $500,000, right? It was a $500,000 or more home. You know that because you only could get in here if that were true, right? Otherwise, this if statement would not have sent you here. What you know at this point, right? When you're in here, you know that this part was not true, right? So you know that the home price was less than $500,000, or you couldn't have gotten to this code to begin with. The other thing to note here, I've got an extra errant one. Notice it's got a red coloring because it knows it's not right. All right, so that's the else, and then we're good here. All right, so the other thing is, what do we know by this point? By this point in the code, we know that the home price, regardless of the home price, the commission was calculated, right? One way or another. There's no other escape, right? It had to have been calculated one way or another. So certainly we can say alert commission equals $ plus commission. There we go. So we know the commission was calculated one way or another. I'm going to save that. I'm going to run it just to kind of check it out. Home price, let's do a home price that's $400,000 for 12123, right? Commission is that, right? Because that was a 10% commission, right? Great. Let me run it again, F5. Now we have two cases to test. Let's do $1 million home. 123. All right, now let's run that one. Commission is $80,000. Yes, sports fans, that's how commission actually gets calculated, and this is not an unusual formula that we're talking about here, right? So this lets us handle two scenarios. In this case, one scenario when the price was this, and this is all other scenarios. If the price wasn't that, then it will take this path, but we guarantee that one of these two paths was certainly taken. Hopefully that makes sense. So are there any other things we want to talk about here? Here's the example in code, but we've already talked about that. And then I think there's some other little notes, but I've said these things, and so you can pause and review those if you'd like. Okay, we want to handle one more quick scenario, and that is working with if and else if. When you have multiple scenarios, you need more selection, right? Your concept, your if concept needs to expand to cover more scenarios. You need more tools. So we're going to look at that tool, and that is if, else if. So let's look at the scenario here. The analogy is your daughter says, what am I going to do this summer? And you say, well, you got some choices. You can either go to music camp, you can go to computer gaming camp, or you can go to grandma's as usual. All right, those are your choices. So that means she has three scenarios to choose from: band camp, gaming camp, or grandma's. Grandma's is the default, right? If she can't make a choice, if she doesn't get excited about those other two things, that's the default, right? That's what's going to happen in the all other cases other than the other ones. Again, mutually exclusive, right? She's going to choose one of those three things. You haven't really given a combo deal or a neither deal. It's going to be one of those cases exactly, right? So that's the analogy. A business analogy, or a more real-world analogy: if you get a score of 90 and above, you get a grade of E. E for exceptional, E for something, let's say exceptional. If you get 75, but you haven't quite gotten to the 90, then that's a satisfactory, right? That's a satisfactory score with an S. And if you get anything else, then I, insufficient, right? So this is sufficient, let's say, satisfactory. This is insufficient. E is excellent, exceptional, something else, right? So the scores, now we can draw a flowchart that looks like this. If the score is greater than or equal to 90, if the answer is yes, you make the grade E. And then you're done, right? Come out here. Otherwise, if the score is not greater than or equal to 90, we need to check again to see if the score is greater than or equal to 75. If that's the case, if the answer is yes, then you get the grade of S, boom, you come down here. But if the answer is no, we know that there's no other case. Notice we don't have to check again. We know that it wasn't greater than or equal to 90 and it wasn't greater than or equal to 75, so it must just need a plain old I. So we just have to set that in the no case, but in any of the cases, we all come back together at this point, and now we know a grade has been assigned, one or the other, and then we display that grade. Pseudocode, you should be able to read that directly. Should look the same as the flowchart in terms of what it's trying to communicate. Mutually exclusive, 3 options. Now, notice we don't have to express here else if the score is less than 90. It's implied. We can't have gotten here if the score was greater than or equal to 90 because it would have done one of the mutually exclusive options and then bailed out and gone to the code after this. So these are simpler than you might think, and we just need to keep slicing carefully. We slice off the top, we slice off the next set, and then we know what's left, right? If it's not this, any other grade will get an I. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Now, let's get out of the slides for a second and let us bring up our code, and we're going to take this away and see if we can code up our score business, right? So we're going to, in this case, we're going to grab the score from the user. So we're going to say var score equals number, prompt, enter numeric score, no default, and then make sure we're closing enough parentheses here, right? Now, in this case, we want to start our if block, right? We need to make some decisions. And then after that, we know we're going to say grade equals, and then we're going to put the grade, right? But in here, we need to determine the grade. So how do we determine it? Well, we're going to say if, and again, you're always going to type this, right? Just by habit, get yourself used to that. So what's the first slice? What's the first thing to take care of? If score is great, oops, make sure, again, don't do that. If score is greater than or equal to 90, right? What do we do in that case? Well, we make a variable called grade, and we put the E in it, E for exceptional, right? So that's the end of that case. Else, but notice now I'm going to say else if, and now again, when I type the word if, I'm always going to do this, right? So what is the next slice? The next slice is if score is greater than or equal to 75. Notice I don't have to care about whether, don't have to say if the score is greater than or equal to 75 and less than 90. No, you don't have to say that. You already know that. The only way you can even have gotten to this if is if it didn't take this path. If it had taken this path, it would already have gone down and run this, right? So you don't have to state more than you need to here. So what is this case? Well, I'm going to make another variable grade. That same, I'm making the variable called grade, and I'm setting it equal to S for satisfactory, right? And then what else? Do I need another else if? Well, no. I've got 3 cases, but I only need really 2 conditions to cover it, right? Because if it's neither of those 2, there's only one option, so I can put the final thing in a plain old else block, because any other score, the default is going to be what? Var grade equals, and then I can put the I. Then I can alert on the grade, and there we go. All right, so if I've done everything right, we have turned a numeric score into these letter equivalents that we've been that have been discussed in the scenario. So let's take a peek and see whether that works. Let's launch that in Firefox. Now here we have some testing to do, right? We should test a 90 and make sure that we get an E for excellent. Yes, indeed. Let's test a 89. All right, what does 89 get? Gets S. Yep, that's right. Run it again. What does a 75 get? S. Yep, that's what we'd want. Run it again. What does a 74 get? I, that makes sense. And then any other grade I can type in. A 0 gets an I, a negative 35 gets an I. Anything else I type in except those ranges should automatically work. So hopefully that makes sense to you and that you see that those things are a translation of the business problem that we discussed into this. So that sort of brings us to the end of this section of our talk, and we're going to continue. We're not quite done yet, but we will continue working on some slightly more complex problems. We're going to look at comparison operators and sort of cover a few more topics, but that's the core of the if statement and what it can do to cover multiple scenarios. So pick up on the next video, and thanks for watching this one.